Hello, everyone. I'm really delighted to extend a very warm welcome to our event, Sustainable Diets for Climate Action, a high-level panel about climate-smart dietary recommendations and behavior change. We are here live from COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. My name is Katy Harris. I'm a senior policy fellow at the Stockholm Environment and also director of the Adaptation Without Borders Global Partnership. And it is my real great pleasure and honor to be your chair for this high-level convening brought to you by the Nordic Council of Ministers. So why are we here today? Today's food systems create more than 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions and are the primary driver of biodiversity loss globally. What we eat and how we produce it is causing major harm to our environments and to our climate. But it is also hurting our health while failing to provide healthy and nutritious food for everyone around the world. Food systems need to be part of the climate negotiations in a way that they haven't been yet to date. And that is why the Nordic Council of Ministers have initiated today's food systems takeover of the Nordic Pavilion. Next year, the new sustainability edition of the Nordic Nutrition Recommendations will be released. It is the result of decades of evidence-based multilateral cooperation. The new edition will provide both healthy and sustainable recommendations, creating a leading collection of the latest data on health and sustainability. We have a really eminent panel lined up for you today that will discuss how we can bring about sustainable and healthy diets, how we can enable behavior change, and how we can create a just transition towards a more sustainable and inclusive future, issues that all should be burning topics here at COP27. So I'm delighted to introduce our panel. We have Professor Rune Blomhoff, who is the project leader of the upcoming edition of the Nordic Nutrition Recommendations at the University of Oslo. We have Brent Loken, who is the global food lead scientist for WWF. We have Elena Villalobos Prats, technical officer of climate change and health at the World Health Organization. And we have the ambassador of Finland to Egypt, His Excellency Pekka Kosonen. So to kick us off, I will give the floor to Rune Blomhoff, who is dialing in live from our studio in Oslo. Rune will give us the latest updates on the sustainability edition of the Nordic Nutrition Recommendations that will be released next year. Rune, we're delighted that you can join us, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. The Nordic Nutrition Recommendation, or NNR, as we call it, is a large cooperation between the 5 Nordic countries, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden, and the 3 Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. NNR is internationally recognized for its high quality of evidence synthesis of the science of health effects of foods and nutrients for more than 40 years. NNR is updated every 8 to 10 years because the science grows exponentially, but also because the methodologies and principles for synthesizing scientific evidence has become much more sophisticated and systematic over time. NNR serves as a main fundament for health and food policies in these 8 countries. For example, the dietary reference values, food-based dietary guidelines, nutrient declarations of food, symbol labeling of food, taxes for health professionals, the basic document for health professionals, health education, public food service, food industry, research, and surveillance. So NNR is now commissioned and funded by Nordic Council of Ministers and the food authorities in the Nordic countries. Nordic Council of Ministers has requested that the next edition of the dietary guidelines not only should consider health, but also should fully integrate climate and other dimensions of sustainability. The present NNR updating project, starting in 2019, and including more than 400 scientists with multidisciplinary expertise in nutrition, health, medicine, sustainability, methodology, will deliver its project report in June 2023. Next slide, please. Sorry, I forgot to say next slide, please. So I think you can continue to the next slide. The main outcome of NNR is to set dietary reference values for these 36 nutrients and food components, as you see illustrated in this picture. And we'll also set dietary guidelines for these 17 food groups, not only based on health effects as previously mentioned, but also climate and the other dimensions of sustainability. Especially relevant for climate is, of course, the food groups such as meat and dairy products, fish, cereals and grains, vegetables, fruits and berries, potatoes, pulses, legumes, and ultra-processed foods. Next slide, please. A main fundament is the synthesis of evidence for health effects. There are many types of evidence synthesis, but the main basis for NNR are the so-called qualified systematic reviews as illustrated in this figure. We use such reviews because they have the least bias and the best quality of evidence synthesis. A qualified systematic review, that is a large technical report which first formulate a very specific research question, then publish the protocol, then do a very systematic search, and then a multidisciplinary group of experts, they will assess quality and bias, extract data, and grade the totality of strength of evidence, and then develop recommendations based on predefined criteria. And of course, all of these steps are peer-reviewed. Next slide, please. So, in addition to the 8 Nordic and Baltic countries, many other national and international health authorities develop such qualified systematic reviews. So, since there has been an international harmonization of methodology, different countries can build on each other's work and resources. The NNR project developed many de novo qualified systematic reviews, but we also fully integrate qualified systematic reviews from other health authorities that use similar high quality methodology. For example, this qualified systematic review shown here on the effect of dietary fat on cardiovascular diseases from the health and food authorities in the US, or other qualified systematic reviews on cancer prevention from the World Cancer Research Fund. Next slide, please. When we integrate sustainability, we need to consider the food system, which include all aspects from food production to consumption and waste, as illustrated here. And as you know, and as already mentioned, the global food system contributes more than 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions. It is the food system that connects healthy dietary guidelines with sustainability. In the NNR project, we first describe the present diet in the Nordic and Baltic countries. We identify present evidence for a healthy diet and identify options for improvement for public health in those 8 countries. Then we describe environmental and sustainability effects of food systems in the Nordic and Baltic countries and identify options for improvement. Finally, we integrate health and sustainability aspect, describe possible conflicts and synergies, and suggest solutions related to the local context in each of the 8 Nordic and Baltic countries. Next slide, please. The IPCC reports, the IPBES reports, as well as the SAPEA report from the European Academies to the European Commission are, of course, main fundamentals of our sustainability assessment. We are also guided by several official declarations by the Nordic Council of Ministers. And finally, we develop also 5 de novo reports in the NNR project. 2 that synthesize scientific evidence of the environmental dimension in a global and a local context. 1 background report on the socio-economical dimensions, and 2 reports that assess options for integration of sustainability in the Nordic and Baltic context. Next slide, please. So this is the first time sustainability will be fully integrated in national dietary guidelines in the 8 countries, and I believe also elsewhere. It is important to realize that the NNR is science advice to national authority. The national authority must then make policy decisions and implementations. I think it's relevant to ask and discuss whether the authorities in each of the 8 Nordic and Baltic countries are prepared to implement NNR, which is based on best available scientific evidence in June 2023 when it is published. Since there are huge synergies between a healthy diet and a sustainable diet, it is interesting to discuss what kind of policy decisions can exploit these common features in healthy diet and sustainable diet. Are today's policies up to date to support implementation of healthy and sustainable diet? And also, how can we convince politicians, authorities, stakeholders that implementations of the best science advice of healthy and sustainable diet should be high on the agenda? Next slide, please. Which lessons can we learn from the NNR project? I think one important lesson is that international collaboration is essential for high quality development of healthy and sustainable guidelines. We hope that the scientific collaboration in NNR can be used as a model for international collaboration between other countries and regions, and also maybe most importantly, that the implementation that hopefully will come of healthy and sustainable diet in the guidelines in the 8 countries can be used as a model for implementation also in other countries and regions. So I'm really happy to see that the diet and food systems are high in the focus and agenda in COP 2027. I hope that diet and food systems also will be high on the agenda in the next COP and in international climate negotiations and regional and national policies. Next slide, please. So, sustainable diet, sustainable dietary guidelines, and sustainable food systems, they are for sure essential for our common future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Rune. for that fantastic overview of what we can expect from the Nordic Nutrition Recommendations when they are launched next year. I have a question for you on perhaps some of the challenges that you had to overcome in incorporating sustainability into those recommendations. But I'm going to turn to you during the panel conversation in the interest of time and give you a moment to think that over. And I'd like to welcome Brent back up to the stage here. So building now on Rune's presentation, we'll now have a panel discussion, a conversation with Brent and Elena and His Excellency Kosonen on how we can enable sustainable and healthy diets. And we'll discuss behavior change and what are some of the key ingredients of this just transition towards a more sustainable and inclusive future for everyone when it comes to our food systems. So I'm going to turn to each of you to perhaps just provide 1 or 2 minutes of opening reflections just on this topic. What do you think perhaps some of the barriers or some of the priorities and next steps when it comes to enabling sustainable and healthy diets and achieving this transformation in our food systems? Brent, perhaps I can turn to you first.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the talk. You know, just reflecting a little bit on this, it's great that diets is being talked about. And it's fantastic that diets is high on the agenda in this pavilion. But we should have diets on the agenda in a pavilion 4 times this size with an audience which is completely jam-packed, standing room only, because this is a topic that everybody wants to talk about. That's not the case. So I don't think that food systems are high up on the agenda at COP. It's great that we have pavilions. We have 5 or 6 pavilions talking about food, which is fantastic. We have a food day, which is focused more on agriculture, but even a focus on food systems in negotiations is almost a no-go at this point. The Coronivia is, hope it might fail. And it's a crisis right now whether that would actually move forward. And some of the negotiators are talking about the fact that talking about food systems within the new text is it's too new. The science isn't out there, which is not the case. We won't have a food systems approach probably in the final cover text, which is, you know, unfortunate. And next year, leading up to COP28, agriculture is on the agenda, food loss and waste is, but diet still isn't. It's such a tricky subject to discuss. So I welcome the fact that the new Nordic dietary recommendations or guidelines are going to embrace climate into the upcoming guidelines, but we have to do a heck of a lot more to raise the ambition across the board. And we need champion countries like the Nordic countries to come on board and push the agenda at all levels and show the leadership at the member state level, or we're not going to succeed.
Thank you so much, Brent, for laying out the challenge that lies before us on this topic, and how diets really need to be a topic of conversation for everyone here at this COP. And I'll come back to you during our conversation in a moment on what do you think beyond the cooperation that we're seeing and the leadership we're seeing in the Nordics on this topic, what needs to happen to enable that change to come about. I would now like to turn to Elena. Elena, you're an expert on climate change and health. I wonder if you'd like to say a bit more about that and the linkages between these 2 crucial topics.
I represent the health community, and for us, we are convinced that the climate crisis is a health crisis. And this is not just to pass a negative message of desperation and the incapacity to do anything good. It's on the opposite. We are convinced that the health argument is the argument that can increase ambition on climate action. And when we talk about health, it's not just because we see this as something, an agenda that has to be implemented by the health sector. On the opposite, we think this is the responsibility of the food systems, agriculture people, the people working on energy, and also basically the built environment. If you go to the next pavilion, you will see that we brought an artist basically to the pit, and it's something similar that you are doing. That's why I just took this. We brought the sculpture of lands. And this is not just to reflect on the 7 million deaths caused every year due to exposure to air pollution. It's also because we are trying to pass the message that investing in healthy mitigation action in other sectors, including healthy diets, will be translated into amazing health positive outcomes. So this is the message that we are passing. We are working with other sectors. We are promoting other sectors to take the responsibility for basically decreasing all the negative health impacts from climate change. And we welcome dialogues and the work that you are promoting from here, because basically if we promote healthy diets, the health of the population and the climate crisis will also be solved, basically.
Thank you so much, Elena, for just emphasizing the role that healthy diets can and must play in the efforts to tackle the climate crisis. I'd now just like to turn to our ambassador here, Ambassador Kosonen, for a few opening remarks reflecting perhaps on Finland's role within the Nordic leadership on sustainable diets.
Thank you. First of all, I would say that let's go to Finland in a moment, but the Nordic cooperation started already in the 1960s, and we have been cooperating in different levels of the society. And I'm glad that this is initiative, also the recommendations are coming now, and COP27 is of course the best fora, and like you said, it's not heard, unfortunately. We all know that the recommendations that will be out next summer in June will be recommendations for the whole Nordic countries, but not only and the Baltics, but not only to us. We are willing to share, of course, the information and the expertise that we have, and we are all quite aware that what we are doing is not enough at the moment. But the Nordic Council and the Council of Ministers is willing to move forward, and sustainability is one of the key targets of the 2030 vision that the Nordic Council has. And we all know that this is we will not be able to get the targets without being sustainable. Sustainability in general is the only way that we can manage those goals that we have.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And thank you all for your opening remarks. Let's have a bit of a conversation now. And I'm going to start us off by focusing on some of the challenges. And Brent, you mentioned this topic on sustainable diets and food waste is really not on the agenda, as it should be here at COP27 and indeed many other global forums around the world. And I'd like to turn to you first, building on Rune's presentation on the Nordic Nutrition Recommendations. What do you think will be some of the challenges for the Nordic and Baltic countries to implement these recommendations? Are there conflicts? Are there competing interests? What is halting this discussion from taking a leading role in negotiations like those we're seeing at COP27?
I don't know. For some reason, diets is a tough topic to talk about. And I don't understand why it's so hard to talk about diets. I mean, I know that, of course, there's a lot of competing interests. There's a lot of financial investments in a way of doing things and a way of feeding people, right? But it's the same way in all other sectors. in the energy sector, in the transport sector. There's competing interest all the way across the board. Diets is inherently personal, and so I think that's probably part of it. People say, you have no right to tell me what to eat. But we do tell people what to eat all the time. we give them recommendations. We put commercials for junk food on the TV, which tells people what to eat. So we are telling people what to eat. We just have to start telling them what to eat in a different way. Now, why there's a block there, I would love to hear other people's opinion on that. But, it's tricky for me to understand why that is. And there's also, a lot of people that say diets are so hard to shift. You can't shift diets. It's one of those intractable problems. But that's also not true, because diets shift in countries in a single generation towards a unhealthy, unsustainable, sort of diet. We just have to figure out how to flip it back the other way. And, what's served on tables like this are vegetables and carrots and things like that. And that has to permeate everything. The food at COP has to be about healthy diets. And I think once we get there, and once we get to that point where it permeates everything, then maybe we can start to have the mind shift. But I would love to hear from others in the room, if you have any ideas on this. But it is intractable at the moment, with no easy solution in sight in the near term.
I'd love to hear from everyone in the room as well. So get thinking. There will be a moment where I turn to you for your questions and comments. So we'd love to hear your insights and suggestions on this topic. Just before I move on to our other panelists, I wonder how much different cultural traditions play a role, or how much, when food is such a part of our cultural traditions in so many ways and a part of our personal identities. You mentioned that in some cases they can radically shift within a generation. But how do we advance towards a more sustainable and healthy for all of us, a transformation, given perhaps these, is there a conflict, I guess, between our cultures and sustainable diets?
Go back to traditional, culinary traditions across the board in cultures, they're pretty healthy and sustainable. A lot of these traditional ways of consuming food are rooted in amazingly wonderful food, right? So I don't see any kind of conflict with it. And in many cases, we're not talking about shifting diets. We're talking about holding on to what you already have, holding on to the wonderful traditions that you have. So I think that they're actually complementary. And that's one of those key levers that we could start to pull on in terms of let's lean on our cultural traditions more, instead of moving towards a McDonald's society, which is not part of anybody's culture, or I mean the modern culture, but not part of many people's traditional culture.
Thank you so much, Brent. So keeping on this topic of challenges, Elena, I'd like to turn to you on what do you see as some of the challenges of enabling good nutrition, but good health more broadly, at the same time as advancing climate sustainability? Are there key barriers or intractable challenges that we really need to overcome?
I think we need to do more to integrate sustainability and healthy. I mean, I work in climate change and health. I'm responsible for capacity building and country support. So I deal with mainly countries in Africa, in Asia, that at a different stage. So basically, when we go with the sustainability alone argument, I think they feel this is an added constraint that they should look at, and first they need to deal with other, outbreaks of foodborne diseases, waterborne diseases, which is already impacting a lot the health of their populations and putting a burden on health systems overall. So from the health perspective, what we are trying to do is basically to make health systems understand that is the future. So basically you cannot advance in something that is not looking at environmental sustainability issues, because quality of care is going to be this. This is the future. So for them to be able to integrate that, we have to find ways that easy approaches that first build resilience in the case of health, but also look at this environmental sustainability without putting a burden in terms of investing in high-level technologies, but just putting them on a pathway that is going to look at sustainability, I think this is easily accepted by health systems. And I think it's the same for what we do in terms of promoting healthy diets and safe diets. Because basically when we promote safe water, safe sanitation, also evidence on which is the nutritious value of, for example, cassava in those countries that are just promoting cassava, but then we are seeing that there is less nutritious in this value in these diets. We need to promote the work that you are basically doing and make it accessible and contextualize it to other countries in the world that can learn about this.
Thank you so much, Elena. And just before I turn to our ambassador here, I would just like to turn back to our panelist, Rune from Oslo. And we've been talking a lot about these challenges. And I'd be really just interested to hear what challenges, perhaps in just a minute or two, what challenges you've had to overcome to incorporate sustainability into the Nordic Nutrition Recommendations to date.
We have a very long tradition, and we have a huge experience in developing food-based dietary guidelines with a focus to improve health. So we have systematic reviews, and we know how to quality check, and we know how to check for risk of bias. So there we have and the NNR, they have a huge credibility in the Nordic and Baltic countries. However, when they should integrate sustainability, there are no well-established methodology for doing this. So we also need carefully to think about methodologies and how we best could do this without losing our credibility. But you should remember that our task in the NNR, that is to summarize evidence, both and in the health and the sustainability field, and try to integrate it. And that calls for international collaboration, because the science is the same. However, the implementations need to be local, because for instance, the public health challenges are different in each country. The agriculture is very different, for instance, in Iceland to Norway to Denmark to Sweden to Finland, and the Baltic countries. There are very different agriculture, import of fruits, vegetables, export of foods. So there is a lot to take into account. So the science is the same, calls for international collaboration, and also options. And our task is to lay out the options, and then the national authorities need to implement it locally.
Thank you very much, Rune. And talking about implementing locally, I'm now going to turn to Ambassador Kosonen to hear about Finland's perspective. How will Finland implement the Nordic Nutrition Recommendations? What does that look like? What does it mean for a country like Finland? And how do you think it will be received in light of some of the challenges we've heard?
Yes, thank you again. I would first like to say that Nordic countries are those countries that have great nature. We have a lot of green stuff, we have forests, we have lakes, we have a lot of berries in the forests and so forth. And this is also going back to basics, I think, is something we should be talking about, is that when you have abundance of possibilities in your country, but they are not being used enough, and clean food is in all the big Michelin star restaurants. That is what they are producing, and this is what they want to sell. But unfortunately, then the big population is not involved in this. But what we will do in Finland when next June, when we have the recommendations, so we have our own recommendations that will come out. They will be first for the big public, so general guidelines on how to interpret the Nordic recommendations. And then there will be another set of recommendations, which will be for the people that are maybe in the situation where they really need the guidelines. And this is of course school children, universities, students, pregnant women, elderly people, all these who are maybe in a group which is more vulnerable than the general group. One thing that we also have, which I want to highlight, is we have a national procurement program, which emphasizes also on sustainability. And our sort of guide to municipalities and cities is, for example, we have free school meals in all of our schools. So children will eat every day a nutritious meal. But in order for the municipalities and cities to get this grant from the government, they have to follow the guidance of what is said to be healthy and nutritious. So there's also this carrot. There's a stick and there's a carrot, and the carrot this time is the money that are given in these procurement measures in order to get some subsidies to the school food. And then also one important thing that I would also want to highlight is really the data. The recommendations that we will give out will be based on a comprehensive collection of data on what is eaten in Finland. What are the things that we eat? And this is not a big scientific exercise as such, because the point of it is that we can change our ways of eating without changing everything at one time. So we can with the recommendations, we'll be able to say that these and these food stuff are those that should be used. These are the ones that we need to use, and also one thing maybe again, local foods. Why don't we use more local foods which will then benefit everybody? And this is all, of course, now linked also to the food security and the food crisis because of the war in Ukraine.
Thank you, Ambassador. I would like now us to shift our perspective. We've talked a lot about some of the challenges to enabling sustainable diets and food systems transformations. But I'd like now to talk to what some of the solutions are and how we can really build on the work of the Nordic Nutrition Recommendations that will be released next year, and go forwards so that by the time we're at COP28, this really is a topic that is high on the agenda. Elena, perhaps I can turn to you first, and I would really like to hear from everyone in the room. So in a moment, I will ask you to raise your hands, and please do share your insights, your suggestions. Also, if you have questions for our panel, there will be a moment to discuss them. But Elena, can I ask, you're here representing the World Health Organization. What role can the WHO play in building on the Nordic Nutrition Recommendations to engage other countries?
I think there are several opportunities, and one is, I'm sure you know, today they are launching the Egypt-led initiative on ICAN. So it's basically an initiative on nutrition and climate change, and it's looking to both food systems, but also looking at the consumption pattern of food systems. And sustainable diets is hopefully to be a key role on that. There are several countries that are supporting this initiative, but hopefully this will continue and be translated into action at country level. There is also another opportunity from the climate change, coming from the climate change and health agenda. As a result of COP26 last year, there was 62 countries committing to building climate resilient and low carbon sustainable health systems. And as part of that, now an alliance for transformative action on climate and health has been established. So I'm leading this alliance. And something that we are seeing is that, of course, we will first build the momentum around implementation of the commitments around health systems, but then we are seeing that there are other priorities that should be considered, and one is the health co-benefits of climate change. So basically, this will look at everything that we can do to promote sustainable diets, just to reduce the emissions and to advance, to decrease the health impacts from what we are seeing, non-communicable diseases, obesity in many countries around the world, and also everything that is looking at reducing the exposure to air pollution. So this is, as I see, the opportunities from building from the health.
Thank you so much, Elena. Brent, I'm going to turn to you. There are a lot of negotiators here working into the night to agree on some outcomes for COP27. Your message to them would that this would need to be high on the agenda. If you could address them now, what would you say they should be doing? What are some of the next steps that you see? What are some of the solutions? Is it a really tough battle they face, or are there opportunities that they're simply not harnessing that they could be to advance climate smart diets in the future?
I mean, a non-negotiable for the negotiators, that's a tongue twister, but you know what I mean, is that a food systems approach gets into the final cover text, and that it's recognized that a food systems approach is absolutely essential to be able to achieve our goals. From that, so many other things get put into place. You adopt the Cornivia and you use that as a mechanism for implementing agriculture practices, but instead of just focusing on food production, you're looking at the entire food systems. From that, the NDCs can then be engaged and harnessed to be able to use a food systems approach. And right now, diets are hardly addressed in any of the NDCs. So from that key decision of getting into the cover text, so many other things get enabled, right? Then the Nordic dietary guidelines, these wonderful guidelines that are being put in place, can then be this, enabler, because it gives the member states permission to enact the policy that they should be, right? And one of the opportunities here, just to say, something about the Nordics, is if there's any place that can do this, it's the Nordic countries. I live in Sweden. My wife is Norwegian. My kids are half Swedish. I'm deeply embedded into the Nordics. And if there's any place that can do it, it's there. What we need to then do in terms of figuring out opportunity is how to translate to different contexts and different places, because it's so different. What do we do in places that are still facing significant burdens of undernutrition and hunger, right? How about those places where thinking about health isn't like in the Nordics, where you can think about, what am I going to eat? In so many places, it's what can I eat? Where is that next food coming from? And that is really that next step, that taking lessons learned, figuring out where it works, what needs to be scaled, what's going to work in different places. And once we start to put that puzzle together, I think we'll really be able to scale it.
Thank you so much. And that comes back to something that Rune really emphasized in his remarks on collaboration. And we can see what can be achieved when there is collaboration across the Nordic context, but there is a real need for global collaboration on this agenda, for regions and countries the world over to really see this as key to the climate transition to a more inclusive and sustainable future. Okay, I'd like to ask now if there are any questions from the audience here for our panelists, or if anybody has any insights or short comments or reflections they'd like to make on this question of healthy diets, on climate smart dietary recommendations, and how we can enable behavior change. I would ask you just to please just introduce yourself and your organization, and then identify if your question is for a particular panelist, to identify who that is. Please.
Thanks. Camilla Björkbom, working with food policy at Eurogroup for Animals. And I was wondering, because at least in EU, there is also a competing discourse, which is about food security and the need to produce more. But in the long term, then we, of course, that might threaten food security because of the climate impact of food production. At the same time, there are very exciting things happening in the EU. So the Commission is working on a new Sustainable Food Systems Framework Law. There's also revision of several food-related policies. So I was wondering, and this is maybe a question that is difficult to reply to, but I was wondering what we can expect in terms of support from the Nordics to really make this development that is underway in the EU to be supported and to not be overthrown by this other discourse that has come because of the war, of course.
Thank you very much for your question there. I'd just like to see if there are any others, and I'll take a few, and then we'll turn back to the panelists.
Hello, I'm Professor Ronit Endeveld. I'm the head of the Nutrition Division in the Ministry of Health in Israel. And I was wondering, what's your opinion about the ultra-processed food and the new cultivated meat, how it is produced in the Nordic countries, and what do you think about the influence on health, satiety, sustainability? It looks like it's a good promise, but no one knows it. So I wonder what's your opinion about it and how you deal it in your country.
Thank you so much. And I think we'll take one more question for now.
I'm Kristen Gudekunst. I'm the new project lead of a campaign we launched today called Beans is How, trying to double global bean consumption in the next 5 years. You mentioned that we really need to have some great campaigning around behavior change with eating. And I would love to know if you have any great examples of people who have done that successfully, and also to just plug my new campaign as a possible partner in doing that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have a question here on Nordic cooperation and how there is a lot of exciting things happening in the EU, but how can support from the Nordics really, I guess, inspire and also, but then support further action across the EU on this, despite multiple challenges and many competing agendas at the moment. Perhaps I could first, for that question, just turn to the ambassador. It would be great to hear just a little bit more about what you see the Nordic countries are doing to enable healthy and sustainable food systems, and whether sort of broader cooperation across the region could play a role in that.
I will try to answer. First of all, like I said earlier, the data that is being collected for the recommendations will be published, of course, and as I understand it, it will be open source information in the sense that the recommendations can be read by everybody. Nordic Council, yes, is doing this, but like has been mentioned, we have the Baltic states already in this. So we are 8 countries in the north who are doing it. And also one important thing is that agriculture as such is very vulnerable, and it's very difficult to adjust the changes in the climate very quickly. So this also takes time in production and all this. But I believe that the recommendations are really needed, because without the recommendations and the scientific data, people will not understand it. They will not believe that this is needed. We talk about climate change. We talk about how hot it has been in Europe this summer, for example. But do people really understand it? And I think for that, the recommendations are needed. And for that, the scientific evidence is needed. And that is the basis, at least from my point of view, is how we can hopefully get more people on board on this issue.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Brent, I wonder if I could turn to you on this question of how do we manage potential competing interests, for instance, around perhaps meat and dairy producers, the significant large role they play in helping deliver food security, with perhaps with the drive for sustainability, and how do we bring these different groups together so that we're all working in cooperation towards a more inclusive food system?
Maybe I'll come back to that one. That's a trickier one, but I want to touch on your 2 points, your 2 questions first, because I think your question was very important, because the war is bringing up some very short-term decision-making, which I think is extremely problematic, especially in the EU, where we're potentially rolling back environmental regulations at the expense of some long-term thinking. So when we're rolling out the Nordic recommendations, that's really a long-term perspective, and somehow we have to keep our eye on the prize and to think this is a long game, and we cannot sacrifice those short-term and roll back things in the short term. I know food security and nationalizing food systems and such is a very important thing at this time, but we can't ever give up on trade. Trade is always going to be a very important part. How about countries like the UAE and Morocco and Iran and places that can't grow enough food to support everybody within their country? Trade is always going to be a very, very important part of this. And in some parts of the world, increasing local food production will increase environmental impacts, and we have to figure out, in terms of if we're talking about competing demands, that's one of those. The Beans is How is a really wonderful campaign. Successes, look at what Coke is doing with Coca-Cola. They're running brilliant campaigns about getting people to drink Coke, right? Or McDonald's, and I think we just need to look to that industry, because they're pouring millions and millions and millions of dollars into promoting this sorts of food. And then when we promote healthy foods, we'll dump 5 to 10 grand into it and think that's enough for like a communications campaign. So I think we could actually learn from what some of these other actors are doing, and we can make beans really sexy so everybody wants to eat them. And once we do that and get athletes on board with it, people are going to want to eat it.
Thank you so much. I would like to invite you to stay for our next session, where we'll actually have a discussion further on how we can enable cooperation across different sectors, including those involved in the meat and dairy sector, as part of this wider agenda. Our time is drawing to a close. I would like to ask the panel just to wrap up with some closing remarks now, and in perhaps just 30 seconds, talk about, sort of fast forward in your mind to COP28. The Nordic Nutrition Recommendations will have been launched, and the discussions about the role that healthy and sustainable diets can play in driving climate action, we hope will have been pushed much further forwards. So what do you hope will be the discussions at COP28? How do you hope this agenda will have changed? And perhaps just reflect for 30 seconds. And of course, we'd like to have seen it in an outcome text and a cover decision at COP27. But what do you really hope that the focus at COP28 will be on if we see progress on this agenda? Brent, I'm going to turn to you first.
Just that, the cover decision, and really integrate it into it. Right now, the ambition on food at COP28 is huge, and we just need to make sure that it remains huge. And that all aspects of the food system are actually covered, right? So it's not just one, so that we don't get pulled down into the rabbit hole of talking about food production and food loss and waste, which are important, but they're much easier things to talk about. And leading up to COP28, in terms of what each one of us could do, I would just like to say, it's up to you to figure out what your individual piece of the puzzle is, right? And we need to commit today to figuring out what I'm going to do between now and COP28 to make sure that all aspects of the food system are talked about and implemented. And, this becomes one of those conversations that's in the plenary. So.
Thank you, Brent, for those rousing words. Elena, any quick reflections on what you hope COP28 will deliver?
I think there is a lot of expectation, at least from the health point of view. There is going to be a bigger focus on health. And I think that the best we could expect from the process overall is probably the inclusion of nutrition and healthy diets within the global stocktake. So if you as Nordic basically build on this excellent outcome that you are going to deliver and manage to implement that, and then come to COP28 with some results that you can share with other countries to motivate them to take similar examples and undertake similar efforts, that will be great, because basically I think that will build the momentum.
Thank you so much. And finally, Ambassador.
Yeah, I think the word sustainability cannot be highlighted enough. So I think that is the thing that we must talk much more about. And going to next COP, I hope this is more taken on the agenda. And because of the food security, food is on the agenda, but not in the way that we wanted to see. And on the recommendations, I hope and I'm confident that when they are out next June, there will be a lot of interest. And of course, like I said, we will be sharing that information and are happy to do it. Also, of course, within EU and other organizations. Thank you.
Look at how the room filled up during the conversation. So there was growing interest even here. Just think about it if we just keep on talking about it. So it'll be huge. It's great to see more people here.
It is indeed a really encouraging sign. And I'd like you to all please stay with us. We've got a whole afternoon of sessions here. For now, I'd like to extend our real sincere thanks and appreciation on behalf of the Nordic Council of Ministers for our fantastic speakers, for sharing all your insights and reflections and ideas, and for calling us all to act and to really play a role to ensure that this important topic is much higher on the agenda at COP28. As we've discussed, in June next year, the new sustainability edition of the Nordic Nutrition Recommendations will be launched. Before this milestone, and indeed after it, Nordic countries will continue to champion the important role that food systems transformation can play in driving a more sustainable and resilient world, and the global cooperation that this effort will demand. So we hope that you will stay with us on the journey, continue to engage. This is just the second in 4 events in the food systems takeover of the Nordic Pavilion today. So get yourself a quick cup of tea and join us in 15 minutes time as we discuss food systems facing changes towards resilience, sustainability and justice. Thank you so much.